I want to thank you all for coming to the final session of the Aging in the Arts series, co-sponsored by the Texas Aging and Longevity Center and the Steve Hicks School of Social Work. And we're extremely pleased and honored to have Ann Basting as our speaker tonight. I'm going to allow Nam-Ki Choi from the School of Social Work to introduce her.
It's a pleasure to have Dr. Ann Basting as our presenter tonight. Dr. Basting is an artist and professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. For over 20 years, she has infused the arts into care settings with a particular focus on people with cognitive disabilities like dementia. Ann Basting is founder and president of the award-winning nonprofit Time Slips Creative Storytelling. Time Slips facilitates an alliance of artists and caregivers, bringing meaning and joy to late life through creative engagement, and has over 935 facilitators in 48 states and 20 countries. Currently, Dr. Basting is leading a Time Slips team of artists to train the collaborating entities such as Dementia Inclusive Durham to infuse the beautiful questions into their engagements. She is author of numerous articles and 4 books. Her most recent book is entitled Creative Care, a Revolutionary Approach to Dementia and Elder Care, published in 2020. She is also author and/or producer of nearly a dozen plays and public performances. Her recent project, I Want to Grow Up, is a reimagining of the story of Peter Pan with 12 rural nursing homes across Kentucky. Dr. Basting's innovative work as both a community-engaged artist and scholar has been recognized by a MacArthur Fellowship in 2016, an Ashoka Fellowship, a Rockefeller Fellowship, a Brookdale National Fellowship, and the Randy Martin Spirit Awards, and numerous other major grants across both the arts and social services. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Basting.
Thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I know that we have bandwidth issues of being able to see everyone, but I do wish I could see all your faces. So I get to take you on a little bit of a tour of the work that Nam-Ki just described, and I'm really ask you to fill the chat with questions, and we can have a little chat afterwards, because it's always best done in dialogue of exploring the work. I get to share my screen now. There we go. So creative care. I know that the last 2 webinars have really been about late style for composers, and also the work done in art museums by older artists. And now I think with this approach is really about seeing creativity as a way to transform the care practices themselves, that care can be infused into every single moment. I think what we've done in this country is really separate health and the arts into different institutions, and they have little overlapping streams sometimes. Art therapy has entered the great buildings of medical centers and long-term care, but and oftentimes there's programs inside of museums to welcome in specific groups for health benefits. But really, we haven't as a country really figured out how to merge those 2 things. And I think we're at a really exciting point right now, historically. Hopefully my book is one of those little tentacles that's starting to reach out toward that ultimate merger. Especially, I think, in long-term care, where people can live for 15 or more years. The hospital model of separation of transitory care to a place where you live there. Of course, we should have it should also be a vibrant cultural center. So I just want to hold those thoughts in the back of our minds as we go through the talk tonight about, is it possible really to conceptualize a way in which creativity is just infused into care? And that's really been sort of my mission in the last evolution of my work and in the book itself. This is actually a photograph from Wendy's Neverland, the production that came out of the I Won't Grow Up project in Kentucky. I'll tell the story of that a little more. I'll just tantalize you with this image right now. So what actually is creative care? What do I mean by it? I really see it as a way to infuse meaning making into everyday moments of care. It's to invite people who receive care into meaning-making opportunities with whatever expressive capacities that they have. If people have words, fantastic. But if they don't, they have movement, they have sound, they have gesture and line and color. There's all kinds of entry points for expression, for using the emotional and symbolic language of the arts to grow and understand oneself, to connect to other people, and to build community. The pandemic, I think, has made it really painfully clear that without meaningful relationships, we don't thrive. Many care communities have and still separate clinical care from activities. They have separate budgets. Activities are not reimbursable. We don't take them really seriously. And I really see it as a false separation that devalues the power of programming and all it can be. If it is done well, it can provide the very purpose for living, for the lives that we're trying to protect, say with infection control. There's two other things that I wanted to bring out about creative care. One is that it taps the innate sense of creativity. So I know you all were learning before about composers and artists that we consider capital C creativity, people collected in museums or performed, whose works are performed by symphonies. But this is the innate sense of small c creativity, where we really, anyone can learn it. Whole care teams, family and friends can use these techniques. It also invites expression out of existing strengths, like I said before, that it is words, movement, sound, line, and color. This photograph here was taken from what we called an artistic house call, where we went and worked with a gentleman named Jim who was beyond language in his dementia journey. We asked the beautiful question, can you show us how water moves? And he took a piece of driftwood and proceeded to do about a 30-minute dance as though it was moving across the water. So facilitating meaning making through creative engagement, I just have these few little points here to sort of underscore the elements of it. And these are actually chapters in creative care that go over this in much more detail. And I apologize, for some reason, I think my slides are on auto movement, so I'm gonna probably go backwards. Yes, and at the core of improvisation, it's essentially an improvisational cycle of inviting and affirming choices through play and improvisation, with affirming them, opening them up through beautiful questions, or questions that open a shared path of wonder and discovery with no right or wrong answer, and then affirmed with offering proof of listening through a variety of techniques, from eye contact to echoing to writing things down. Whatever form of proof will verify to the person that they've been heard. Framing it in rigor and with value. It doesn't have to be monetary, but it can be social capital to let the person know that their contribution is being valued. And then also that it always connects in some way with the larger world. It is shared publicly in some way with another person or people, or even just on a bulletin board, but done in a really tasteful way, so that the person knows that there's a purpose behind what they're contributing to. When can you do it? Programming happens like in sanctioned moments throughout the day often, but this can really also spill over into transition time, passing a window, sitting at a table together. I have this slide here because it's just a moment between two people where you can invite someone to respond to a prompt that might be the color of or a pattern on their shirt, or a texture or a smell, or anything that can be used as a prompt to engage. Really, I think my quest is that this approach becomes like water, a sustainable, the quest is really for sustainable systems to support meaning making, and that a community in which creativity is really infused into care practices, in transitory moments, in programming, in public open celebrations, so that a care community, for example, would have meaningful connections with partnerships to invite people in, so that they become more than sort of a stigmatized health center, but more also a cultural center where meaning and beauty can happen and be created every day. My first run at this was a project called the Penelope Project, where we worked with an entire CCRC, a continuing care retirement community, independent, skilled, assisted living, and adult day, to reimagine the story of Homer's Odyssey. And working in myth is very specific and purposeful because it is older than the oldest person in the room, and because it taps into archetypal storylines that even people with dementia, even if they can't tell you the story, can feel that they know the story in some way. So this culminated with an original play that was staged site specifically in the care community for an outside paying audience. There's a documentary you can watch about it, and an entire book that we edited with not all the participants, but many of the participants from the theater company, the long-term care community, the residents, the staff, and even the students that worked with me from UWM. We really were thrilled with how that worked. It was immersive and transformative creativity. I think it became part of the daily breath of the organization. And after that happened, they had an institutional memory of what was possible with programming, collaborative programming across all areas of care. And it was a profoundly moving experience for everyone who was involved. The thing that we noticed was that, or we thought was that, could we do this for people living at home? Because as we all know, the vast majority of older adults with dementia, or really any disability, they're not in congregate settings, they're living at home, as they should be, as it should be a choice. But how can we bring meaningful engagement to people who were isolated before the pandemic? And this project actually started, it was between 2011 and 2014. And to reach people, we studied the systems that were in place to reach older adults living alone. Meal delivery, telephone reassurance, friendly visitor programs, even mail delivery. We studied those systems. Where in those systems could we insert creative engagement, and with what really simple invitation to engage that felt safe, so that people could respond. So we ultimately ended up training the meal delivery drivers, offering what we called questions of the week, which became beautiful questions in the evolution of the work. We got back probably 3,000, over 2,500 responses, both by Google Voice line, and then also handwritten cards. And at the end, we made an exhibit at city halls to advocate for seeing these people as valued citizens, that their input was important to the life of a thriving city. This is just a little summary of what I said, which is that we studied the systems, we mapped the assets. Are there partners that we could use to create a feedback loop? So we did partner with public radio because we wanted to make sure that people had access to knowing that they were part of this bigger project. We had weekly little 3-minute audio interviews and segments that we cut together so people could tune in at the same time every week to hear their responses. We monitored and adjusted as we were learning and going so that it really was an iterative project that responded to the needs and the changes that we were learning about from those who were participating. It was a simple refusal to separate health and culture, social service and arts and culture. We just infused them into each other's systems. We demanded that it was possible to find beauty and wonder everywhere, even in profound disability and isolation. And then another code that we had for ourselves was that we just never stopped inviting all the way to the end, that the project has to be dynamic enough that you can bring in new people all the way to the final moments. Meals on Wheels drivers were fantastic. They loved hearing the feedback that they got from people. This was just a little example of what might you like to tell Milwaukee that I'm proud to be a Milwaukeean. It gives you an idea of what the cards, you can feel their effort in the handwriting and their responses. If you could go anywhere in Milwaukee right now, where would you go? It was also an expression of need to a swimming pool to take a shower. What is something you could teach another person to care for the elderly, not to gossip, and to give your troubles to Jesus? Again, this is that photograph. We followed up with Jim with an artistic house call. So when people would leave a message on the Google Voice line, we would follow up with a call and say, invite them to the next level of participation, which in this case was an artistic house call. And then we did the feedback loop where we taught the dance to professional James Hart and Rebecca Martinez, learned the dance, and then brought it back and shared it with Jim's wife in the garden that Jim had planted and tended for many years. And while that dance was happening, the neighbor, Antonia, came over, who was also quite isolated and going through chemotherapy, and just joined in the dance. And James just held out his hand and she joined in very easily, and it was quite powerful. Helped that she was also wearing this fabulous purple. We had in the exhibit interactive question stations. The exhibit was really designed by Sojourn Theater's Shannon Scrofano, who just did an amazing job. Maureen Towie was my co-lead artist on the whole project from Sojourn as well. And it gives you a sense of the cards that we shared from the older adult participants, but then also invited the people who attended the 2-month-long exhibit to add their own cards. What is your safe Harper? In my room? All kinds of different beautiful responses. Milwaukee City Hall is a gorgeous building that has 8 floors of atrium, and you can see kind of the island that Shannon designed. It had audio stations so you could hear segments that we had cut together of all the voices of the elder participants. And then we also staged a restaging of the dance for the love of Jim, which is what Fran had titled the performance of the driftwood. Wendy's Neverland was then an extrapolation of the Penelope project, where we thought, well, we did it in 1 nursing home. Could we do it in 12? How could we scale it? How big could we get it and still keep, have the center hold, right? The magic of that transformative sense of creativity And again, this was a magnificent experience. It started in 2018, January, with training. It was done with civil monetary penalty funds from the state of Kentucky and CMS. We trained the quality of life directors in the time slips approach, the improvisational feedback loops. And then we created a creativity guide that took apart the story of Peter Pan into several themes: flying, home, care. What is this thing about childhood that Peter is so obsessed about? And what is it about adulthood that we actually like? It was really an incredible unpacking of the story that then over the course of the year, it was really, we taught the quality of life directors to infuse it into their programming and then come back to us with these riches of poems and stories and dances and all kinds of different things. We had a choreographer and a set designer who, Jeff Becker, who worked in site-specific design, and a music director. We all worked together. The quality of life directors came together and we had a devising retreat where we said, what from this story resonated the most to you? And let's put together a play idea that we'll be able to then, you guys can put on in 3 of the 12 nursing homes. They worked in 4 nursing home clusters together. And Wendy's Neverland is what came out. And the idea was that the storyline enabled them to play themselves. Wendy was on hospice, finishing growing up, and she had been telling stories of Neverland for 10 years since she lived there. No one believed them. They thought she was a little off, but they love her so much. She's such a dear that they decided to honor her in her final days by restaging the stories from Neverland. So they all made their own crazy costumes, which were a merger of Lost Boys and pirates and fairies. They sang Wendy's favorite songs. They invited the audience to come in and share their positive thoughts so they could fly and figure out to shed a fear, to articulate a fear so that they could fly. And then they went to flight school so that they could say where they wanted to fly and then lift up with pixie dust, and then journeyed through to actually meet Wendy and listen to poems and stories that came out of the workshops. It was really, again, a very powerful experience. And you can see here, I think, just tapping the innate creativity and learning how to really identify and value the creativity of the staff. The woman in the middle here with the white fuzzy hat is the director of nursing, who came to find out she was a songwriter and a poet, and she wrote an original piece for this production. The quality of life director is on the left with some other staff member's baby dressed up like a fairy princess, or a fairy with tutus and wings. And Jimmy, who is the pirate king, who's a resident and whose beautiful jacket was made by a staff member who was an incredible seamstress. The story is also of the crocodile who bears the burden of all of the fears. We wrote our fears on canning lids and affixed them to the crocodile. He sort of became the scapegoat who carried the weight of all of our fears. He was very playful at first, but then he's really not supposed to be there, and they have a code croc from the administrators. And we come to find out he's actually friends with Wendy from the real live Neverland. And he's the one who guides us on how to believe in Wendy and what it means, in the same way that in the original story, we believe in fairies by clapping. Was transformative for the residents. A little bit of face paint transforms everyone, but you can also feel the excitement of being part of something so meaningful. The performance that John was part of here, we had the city hall closed down next door so the whole staff could come to the nursing home to be part of this performance. The police chief couldn't believe what he was seeing in this nursing home, which he had only associated with the death of his own grandfather. It really was an opportunity to transform the way people thought about this place and the people in it, not just the residents, but also the staff. Mary insisted that she come out. She hadn't been out of her room very much, and she wanted to participate. I think you can just feel by some of the photographs the elevated sense of joy and meaning. And I just love this for the staff member who's it just looks like she's fallen in love with her. That's one of the residents who played Wendy, and then Bob Martin, who was the director of the play, who also in 2 of the performances played the Crocodile. And in this scene, they're singing "I'll Fly Away" together, which is the final moment. The older adults choreographed with Kevin Ayega Jeff, our choreographer, their own movement sequence to "I'll Fly Away," and they taught it to the audience. And the whole room sang it, 100 audience members and the residents and the staff. It seems like a dream now because we've so thoroughly shut down nursing homes and locked people into isolation. But I think it's a perfect story now to come out and show us what's possible now, now that we're emerging out of isolation. The Crocodile taught us that to believe in the elders, you just meet the outstretched hand and show that you believe. And that's then what the elders gathered in a circle in the main dining room did. They turned outward to the audience and just held their hand up in this incredible moment of trust. And then the audience came up and met the hands of the elders. There's the "I'll Fly Away" number. Again, quite... we had quite a racket going on. It was really moving. In this particular one in Sunrise Manor in Hodgenville, Kentucky, 3 members of the high school brass band played with us. A beloved longtime music teacher in the community sported a bright yellow tutu and was playing the piano, and our music director, Cheyenne, was playing as well, and Corey, who also played the fiddle. So this is an example of what we call co-creation, which is sort of at the root of creative care. In these larger projects like this, in creative care is the element just of the moment between people, but it's also sort of having the daring to have long range projects that moments can build into. The destination of those projects is really unknown. You're making it together. You have a shared sense of expertise. You cannot do this without each other's input. A shared sense of emotional risk because you're being creative together, and a shared sense of reward, all of which accumulates into relationship building and bonding and community building. Again, the beautiful questions open the process, the improvisational cycle drives it forward, and the proof of listening lets the person know that they've been heard and valued. So now here we are in a whole different moment. COVID hits. I, for one, found it, I was totally disorientating and tragic, but it was also an incredible burst of creativity that people, whenever there was a boundary, people found ways to breach it. I like this photo because of that. Like, we're going to go to the windows and we're going to show the person that we're present for them and that we're caring. 36% of deaths have been elders in long-term care settings, which is just 1% of the population. Loneliness and isolation, lack of purpose and meaning was just rampant. I think the excess deaths of people with dementia and Alzheimer's who found themselves isolated, you could just see a failure to thrive. It was just, I described it in some ways as like, you know, those movies where someone's on a spacewalk and then they just let go of the line that was tethering them to the spaceship, and they just float off. And that's what it felt like to me in some of these situations. We also found ourselves staring into the face of ageism and ableism. And I think some of the work that I shared with you, I hope compels a vision for how we can move forward, not go back to normal, because back to normal was not working either. Some of the projects I worked on during COVID, because we were all of a sudden, we were like, oh my goodness, we did Islands in Milwaukee. We know how to do this. We had been piloting Telestories, shaping stories by phone, because that is the lowest common denominator. Not everyone has Wi-Fi or broadband or access or the ability to use computers. Zoom is awesome, right? But how could we make Zoom accessible successfully by phone only and use Zoom as a base? So we wrote a grant to the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. Artists were also all out of work at the time, gig workers especially, and we said we're going to hire and train 10 artists that represent the diversity of Milwaukee. And we are going to we're going to work with Eris Senior Network, which had been doing well checks and companion visits and rides for older adults, to help us recruit 100 older adults. Each artist would do a weekly 30-minute story shaping and story exchange with an elder for 12 weeks during the July to November. So a pretty intense period of the pandemic. And it was, I think, a lifesaver for both sides. We did a pre and post evaluation with the UCLA loneliness scale, the short version, just 3 questions. And we found that this reduced loneliness by 51% for the participating elders and 60% for the artists. We did have a comparison, so just the well check calls reduced the loneliness by 23%. So it was still that's pretty big, but still to 50% is double. The artists worked together with their 10 elders to co-create some kind of culminating artifact, for lack of a better word. And this I include here just because it was so lovely. Brenna did recipes for living. So she invited her callers to share with her a recipe that they loved. And then she actually, living alone, made them all and photographed them. But then they also worked on recipes for living. So Dorothea wrote about a recipe for peace, a sourdough starter, reaching out and helping elders, listening, a good dialogue, not being so quick to judge were the ingredients. So it gives you an idea of that lovely cookbook that she created. I include this here. I have it in an animation as well. This was Stephen Dixon's interview with one of the elders that he worked with, Miss Emma.
Why?
First, I was in there for congestive heart failure. And then the next time I was in there, I fell here and broke my feet. I broke my foot in here. Getting to the door to open the door for the guy gonna go do my grocery shopping for me. And when he come, I crawled over there to the door. And when he come in, I said, I think I done broke my foot. He said, oh no. He picked me up, put me in the wheelchair, and he called, the aide who sent my aide out, and he told him to get me to the hospital. And he said, you won't go.
Why not? Why wouldn't you go?
Because I'm sitting up there taking my foot, and I guess you think I was stupid. Taking my foot, trying to push the bone back down in my
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
He said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Put me in the bed." He put me in the bed and he gave me the key. 4 days that morning, I had to call them, push the lifeline, get paramedics in. And they said, "You a good woman." They got me to the hospital, and the doctor put me, told me same thing paramedic told me. He said, "You a good woman." They put me to sleep, and next thing I know, they done put a pin in my foot, and they done put a cast on my leg.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when they put me in the nursing home. I was in there for about 3 or 4 months.
I'll just share part of that with you because it's pretty long, but it gives you a taste of the beauty of the story and the exchange. Whoop. We also had printed beautiful question cards, and on the back, you can see the back there. Here's my answer. What's yours? John Michael Kohler Art Center up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, just about an hour north of here, which is an incredible art center focused on sort of homegrown artists, distributed these to the community with a mobile truck that just went around and in little packets, meaning-making packets. And I just include this here because I love the answer, which is, what is the most beautiful sound in the world? Your mother's voice from birth till the end of time. And we're doing a part 2 from the Telestories, which we did from July to November. Part 2, we wanted to move on really quickly because we're facing winter. We worked with the County Division on Aging to work with UCC, the United Community Center, which is all mostly Spanish speaking elders. So we translated the training and everything into Spanish, all the questions, and also with Meals on Wheels again, and sent out a question on the back of the menus, and have our 800 number gathering calls. If you could look outside your window and see anything you wish, what would you want to see and why? And we have 3 artists in residence who are offering weekly group sessions. So instead of doing an artistic house call, we're then following up calls and guiding them to a group session accessible by phone. And then they're also going to shape all the answers into a celebration piece of public art in June. So you can look on the Timeslips website to see how to participate in that webinar. You'll be able to see it shared. But I thought I would share this response because it's, again, just really delightful.
If you could look outside your window and see anything you wish, what would you want to see and why? If I looked out my window, I would like to see a very large garden of roses, of all different kinds of roses and different colors. And the reason I would like to see this is my husband was very good with roses. And each of the 2 homes that we owned while he was alive had beautiful, beautiful rose gardens. I could pick roses all the time and share them with my neighbors. I would love to look out now and see roses.
So in Milwaukee, we're training the volunteers and the staff of the social service agencies, again, in Spanish and English. Beautiful questions are delivered by meals and through well check calls. Responses are through cards or the 800 number, and 3 artists are hosting group calls as follow-up and shaping responses for June. In Durham, it's similar. We're teaching 7 community groups these techniques and inviting people with dementia living at home alone or underconnected to share their responses to the beautiful questions. We have several artists in residence working there, also collaborating with Service Learning from Duke And we just hired a composer with support from the National Endowment for the Arts to shape the responses into an original composition that'll be performed by the Durham Children's Choir in their April 2022 performance, which I just can't wait to hear. So I leave you with this thought of, is there a vision for integration where it's much more permeable between the two? I think we'll never lose the buildings. We need the buildings, but the way that we conceptualize them is much more integrated. That meaning making is seen as part of our full sense of wellness and health, and that we don't divide them conceptually, and that even in university structures, that there are much more fluid engagement across those boundaries. Just leave you with a little note about time slips, which is over COVID, we had the blessing of funding from the Ralph Wilson Foundation to really develop a whole series of support resources for families and friends to learn very simple engagement techniques so that they can have use of them at home, which is so crucial to being able to keep people thriving at home as long as possible, both parts of the care partnership. So we developed what's called engagement parties, because that sounds fun, doesn't it? Like you want to go to an engagement party. And they can host them like a Tupperware party for their family and friends, just to play and learn these techniques so that they aren't afraid to engage with someone with dementia in their family or their neighborhood. And those are free, accessible online. And then creative campuses, where we teach these techniques for meaningful service learning. And then you got a taste of all the organizations that we're working with. And this is just thrilling because it's not available yet, but I just got the box yesterday, so I have it in my hand, which is the Imagination Kit, which has a journal and 15 beautiful questions and 15 image prompts for people to use. So something beautiful and hopeful is what we're hoping to insert into really a condition that has been seen largely as just despair. Not envisioning that meaning is going to be possible for people all the way to the end, and it really is. So thank you, and I look forward to some questions.
Thank you for a phenomenal talk and really inspiring us with a lot of wonderful ideas about ways to think about our own aging and other people's aging. We do have a question. We have a couple of comments here. We have the first one is maybe more specific. If someone can put it in the chat, who knows the answer, are there assisted living organizations in Austin which incorporate your concept? You might know, Anne, I think you mentioned that one of your board members is here. Do you know that one, or should we have some of the people?
I can send you, this is the delightful thing about, I changed my title from president to I'm now founder and lead creative strategist, which means I'm investing in the sustainability of a nonprofit by having the founder kind of step away. So I don't know the answer to that, and that's a good thing. But you can go to timeslips.org, and on the very main page, there's a map that we were so thrilled to get this map created, where all 950 certified facilitators are listed on there. So if there is someone in Austin, you'll be able to find them on the map, and they should be hot linkable as well.
Wonderful. I imagine those websites are going to get a lot of activity after this session. We have a doctoral student who asked if you could talk more about how you see this fitting into education or research as well. So how would you bring that into the study of health and aging a bit more?
Please do research. Oh my God. All we hear is that there's not enough data, that's really been what's holding back this merger, that behavioral interventions, right? they don't get the same funding stream. They're challenging to create research structures around, because, as I like to say, our research systems are really built for pills and interventions like that. But a pill you can randomize really easily, and you can do it in massive amounts of people. So you get huge scale numbers for the power analysis, and you get, that's the gold standard, right? But then when you're doing something like the Kentucky project, how do you randomize a year and a half long process, iterative arts process of inviting people into meaning making and infusing it into everyday moments, and then getting a waiver from the state so that wards of the state can have their photographs taken, because this is a monumental theater production in the largest employer in the county, right? Like, you can't measure. It is really, really hard to measure these things. Also because the intervention has a 360-degree benefit around. So it's like if a pill made everyone in the building better, not just the person who took it, right? So it's complicated to do this kind of relational impact study, and also to get big enough numbers so that you have a meaningful sample size. We're still struggling. I think we're not. I've been in parts of some really great conversations that I think have emerged out of the frustrations from COVID, where even the minimum data set that we're gathering in nursing homes, we're just not measuring the right stuff. If they're not sensitive enough to capture the benefit of even these kinds of interventions, which are massive, they don't pick it up. So I think we're in a position where we need new tools, we need new measurements, we need new really innovative ways of measuring the impact of this work. So I get a little passionate about that because it's like a frustration of mine, because we can't, people are like, well, there's not enough studies, we need more research. I'm like, yeah. So we're just been chasing our tails for a decade now around the call for more research, because we don't have the tools, because we can't get the funding, because there isn't the baseline. I think the whole thing is moving a little bit. It's getting bigger and getting more support, but please do the research. That's my call, my plea for more people to do it. And the great thing I think about time slips and some other interventions as well is that the training is online, so the training can be consistent. It's not a variable. So that's actually really helpful. And that's been delightful in that every now and then I'll have a Google alert on time slips or something, and I'll find a study from China that says I'm like, somebody did a study in China, because the training is all online, so people can just take it and implement it in different places around the world. That probably didn't answer your question.
No, you've got a smiley exclamation point in response, so I think you did address it well. We also were wondering, you also are getting all these, oh, this is a great talk. You're getting a lot of wonderful people who really appreciate everything you've brought to us. But we also have the question of, how do you choose the sites that you work with?
That's a great, it's a kind of a long answer. This work, I've been doing this with time slips, actually started in 1998, which was when Karen and I got my Brookdale Fellowship, right? This was my study to see if I could replicate it in 4 adult day centers. And then we spun it out of the universities in 2013 as an independent nonprofit. We've been ahead of the field. The field was not ready for this kind of work. So we were training individuals for a long time, because individuals would get it and then they would try to implement it, but we weren't in a place where we could train organizations. So really for a long time, it was about just getting the word out there and people coming to us and training individuals, and then sort of seeding the ground for the development of this field. And then I think, a happy thing in the last I'd say 7 or 8 years, the field has opened to this kind of concept around culture change, the power of the arts and creative expression. And so now organizations are really opening up to this work in a much, much more. So they still really do come to us. That I have a philosophy that still we're at the phase where we have to go where we're loved, because you can't, it's just too much to try to infuse something to a resistant system. And dissemination of innovation, you know, you have to go with the first, the people who are already a little bit on board for culture change. If they're not prepared for that culture change work, it's not going to work. I think the whole field will move forward. That's another one of the reasons why we're investing upstream to students and in family and friends, to put external pressure on the systems that this work works. And that, you know, the dream is that the families and then the students who then, if they do go into the field, or they all develop the expectation that this kind of work will be in the institutions, and they'll be knocking and saying, why aren't you doing this? This works really well. Why aren't you doing this? So working simultaneously from trying to get regulation to advance, and reimbursement to advance, so that you're creating carrots and sticks inside the systems of care, but also external pressure from letting these stories out about the power of this work, so that people outside can put pressure on the systems as well.
Yeah, I want to ask a follow-up question from where you're coming from in terms of receptivity to this. And it's kind of on two levels that I can imagine within some facilities, particularly in this generation of men, that sort of letting go and becoming a part of art is not a way they've thought about themselves. Now, maybe as dementia, you know, begins to occur, they're more receptive to things they can still do cognitively. But I guess I'm wondering within the facility about the people who are resistant. And then I'm wondering, because I can see the benefit across different cultural groups or even underserved groups, and yet this might not be part of their repertoire. And so I guess I'm wondering how you generate that receptivity in people who could benefit but aren't there.
Well, that's part of the reason that Time Slips is called creative storytelling instead of arts.
Yeah.
I think the arts have been, for some odd reason, and I would love someone in the arts to do a historical study of this, but they've been so misunderstood and maligned in this country as excessive and extra, whereas in other cultures it's not. It's really fascinating how that has happened in this country. It's always the first to be cut. It's seen as, it's a hot spot political issue for people, when it's just not in other cultures. So if you come in, and we learned that actually in the Islands of Milwaukee project with Sojourn Theater, that if you came with the first message of this is an arts project, no. Instead, our first ask was, I have a question of the day. Would you like to hear it? Yes. Everyone said yes to that. So it was like this invitation for wonder and an expression and meaning making, rather than leading with capital A art. Because arts have been professionalized and distanced and politicized, and there's just a whole lot of other stuff written over the word art in this country. Storytelling, everyone has access, and it's kind of almost has a universal value to it. And it has a clear social role that is valued and gender neutral. It's kind of an amazing thing. So we really rest on storytelling a little bit more, and you can tell stories in any medium. It doesn't only have to be words. I think we've suffered a little bit because people associate it solely with words, so we've pushed against that, saying you can do a sound story. It's all in sound or all in movement, or things like that. The other thing is that notion of never stop inviting, because it does have, I describe sometimes these projects and this work as like it's a bad thing for Texas, but it's the rolling snowball effect, where you just keep accumulating people and enthusiasm and reflecting them back to their own community, so that people, and you do it in a way that has rigor and value, so that people, like, we had this professional choreographer come in for this project, and people were, I mean, he's magnetic, he's an amazing human being, and people understood that if we were asking them to move, it wasn't just, it was not just a frivolous thing. We were making it into a movement piece. And that, I think, that accumulation of that snowball effect, never stop inviting and present it back to the community with rigor and value. And eventually people recognize the integrity of it by the mutual investment of their peers, and they want to be involved. That's really what we do.
That's terrific. Yeah, and it certainly has spread. I mean, you know, it's really become a movement. We have time for just one more question. If someone would like to ask, what is the biggest impediment to the cultural change? Is it money or lack of imagination of the healthcare professionals, or what would you?
I think rigidity of the system, and that's its own lecture, right? That's a whole other thing. You know, it crushes me a little bit, the lack of imagination of healthcare professionals, because I think, like I said, this work is like giving a pill to everyone in the community, because they're starved. The staff are starved for the opportunity for meaning making in their work. And when we have done asset mapping exercises in care settings, any care organization, there's such a release of breath about, oh my goodness, you're asking me how I'm creative in my daily life. No one's ever asked me that before in a job I've worked in, and here's how I do it. And then you have this list of, these care organizations are sitting on a mountain of talent, and they never even ask. You know, they never ask how people are creatively fulfilled in their own lives. And it doesn't have to be opera, you know what I mean? It can be, opera's great, and they should, but a really great example is, we did an asset map at one of the nursing homes, and we discovered that the building maintenance team had a heavy metal bluegrass band. It was great. And we're like, can you guys play? Yeah, we'd love to do that. And then one of the staff members' uncle or father-in-laws was a master carpenter who wanted to contribute. You know, I mean, just we don't ask. And these organizations turn inward and then become rigid and focused on delivery of very specific. We all need to reduce pressure ulcers, but like I said, what are we protecting people for if there's no purpose or no meaning in people's lives? So we just have to integrate them. That's just where we are. Just refuse the separation. That's where we are.
That's a great thought for us to wrap up this evening. We really appreciate everyone attending, and we really appreciate just a fabulous and thought-provoking lecture. Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you to the audience too.